Shawn, welcome to Locked In, man, all the way from Wisconsin. We don't get too many Wisconsin guests out here, so grateful to have you.
Nice, man. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you were just giving me a brief overlay outside. I mean, your story, it's going to speak for itself, and, I'm so excited to dive into it. And, I'm sure we'll come up with a catchy title and thumbnail for this, which the viewers will know this episode is one they don't want to miss. Did you grow up in Wisconsin?
I didn't know. I actually grew up in Seattle, Washington. I'm the oldest of 6 kids, and I grew up on a small farm outside of Seattle until I was a teenager. I didn't move to Wisconsin until 2003.
Oh, 6 kids.
Yeah, I'm the oldest of 6.
What was the age range?
So it was me, and then about every year and a half, except for the 2 youngest ones were born both in 1978. Okay. So they're Irish twins, and so I was 9 when my youngest sister was born.
Wow, were you guys close growing up?
For a while, but as I got older, there was such an age gap that it's not really easy. How do I engage with a 10-year-old when I'm 17, 18 years old, right? So I'm close to my youngest brother now, a lot closer than I've been in a long time.
Yeah, it's interesting when you're in those teenage years, you feel like you can't connect to the kids, but then when you get older, then you can feel like you're back to connecting the kids. Yeah. Like now I can relate to a kid more than I did when I was a teenager.
Right, sure.
What did your parents do for work?
So my father worked in the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard for 40 years, and my mother retired from a corporate job in operations management. My parents are divorced. They got divorced in 1974. I'll go right into the story. They got divorced in 1974. I was 4 years old, and I remember lots of fighting and arguments between my parents. And then in 76, my father remarried my stepmother. My mother was out of the picture for a few years. And, it was kind of tough on me as a kid. And I think then my father, he would work swing shift, and I would work, and so my stepmom would work during the day. So I didn't really see him. So in my early childhood, there wasn't a lot of supervision for like me and my brother, who was a year and a half younger. I was in trouble all the time, right? It was stupid shit. It was, shooting the flowers out of the neighbor's yard with a BB gun, or, mischievous things like building fires and burning gunpowder and just being a mischievous kid until I was a teenager. And then that mischievous stuff turned into car theft, burglary. And you know what? It wasn't for the money. I wasn't selling the cars. It was joyriding. It was breaking into a house and drinking some beer. You know what I mean? It was for the excitement of it as a kid. So that's kind of where I grew up. When I was about 15, I moved to Seattle. My mom's back in the picture now. I moved over to Seattle, which good or bad for me, right? The element is a lot more opportunity to commit petty crimes, but I didn't really get caught for much. Bigger city, they didn't know me as well, so I didn't get caught for as much there.
Do you feel like you're lashing out because of the divorce?
Yeah, that and just pure lack of supervision, right? Young boys especially need supervision, and they need somebody to teach them boundaries, and I wasn't getting any of that. And so it kind of created a really weird dynamic where I kind of did whatever I wanted.
I wonder if you weren't the oldest, if it would have had a different effect, because then you would have had someone to look up to.
Not my story to tell, but my younger brother got in a lot of trouble as well, but my youngest brother never got in trouble. Never.
So interesting.
Yeah, he never got in trouble. And I think some of that was watching his 2 older brothers always in trouble, and he just, I'm not going down that road. He had that enough distance to see the bad outcomes from some of the things that we did.
Were you taking high school seriously at all?
Oh, well, no. So I barely graduated high school. In fact, I should have graduated in 1988, but my actual graduation year is 1989 because I joined the National Guard to get out of the house when I was a kid, and that didn't last very long. But I joined the National Guard. I went to basic training between my junior and senior years, so I got work credit. They called it work credit, which put me just barely over enough credits to graduate. The school was like, just get rid of this. I was fighting all the time. Very athletic, strong. I'm short and stocky, and so a lot of things came out as wanting to fight, and I didn't take anything from anybody. If they said something to me, all right, let's go fight. Right? So they were just glad to get rid of me, I think.
Did you have a close group of friends at all? Were you involved with anyone?
Yeah, there was about 6 or 7 of us that were running around doing the same things, right? The car theft and the joyriding and the burglary and things like that. But I was kind of a loner kid in a way. I wasn't really tight with that group or any group. I didn't have a lot of confidence when I was in high school. I didn't have anything that really gave me confidence while I was in high school. So I didn't do good in my studies. Smart enough kid, but just didn't do good in my studies. I didn't go to school if I didn't have to. Right? There were many days that I would drive into the parking lot and drive right back out and just not go. And my parents weren't there to supervise me or tell me, hey, you're going to school, and find ways for me to get engaged in school.
What about drugs and alcohol? Did that play a part in your childhood?
Man, I would drink a few beers and I would smoke some pot, right? And like every kid, but I didn't do any hard drugs when I was young.
That's good.
Well, it didn't turn out so good. I did some of those hard drugs later on, and we'll get into that a little bit now that played out.
Yeah. So you do make it through high school?
I make it through high school. In fact, after high school, I go to my advanced training for the National Guard, and then come home. And I ended up getting arrested for a burglary as an adult.
While still in the National Guard?
While still in the National Guard. I'd come home. I had in between my drills, I'd committed a burglary with a friend of mine, and they didn't take them long to pick us up. I drove my truck, which was, back in the 80s, it was lowrider trucks, right? So I just drove my bright red lowrider truck right up to the building, and we loaded stuff in it. Wasn't really thinking too clearly. They had us within 24 hours, and they sentenced me to 120 days in the county jail.
Why the burglary?
Again, it was just like petty shit. It was, and this was the first crime I ever committed that I thought, I'm going to sell these tools and I'm going to get money. That was the first time that had ever happened. Well, they had us within 24 hours, so none of the money ever came, and they got the tools back, but they gave me 120 days.
Were you making money or decent money through the National Guard?
No, I actually very mechanically inclined. So I was working in a machine shop in Seattle. In fact, one of Seattle's premier machine shops, I got a job in to work when I wasn't in the National Guard. And it was a great job, but I couldn't, those friends that I was hanging out with, it was drinking on Fridays, go steal a Camaro, have some more beers. It was stuff like that we did.
Would you say you were more influenced to do some of these things by who you were hanging out with?
Yeah, absolutely. Because while I wasn't really a popular kid, and I think there was a lot of that where I wanted to be, right? I would look around at, a very athletic kid in high school, but only 5'5" and 140 pounds. So I'm not going to play football. I'm not barely going to be able to play baseball and compete against some of these kids. So I wasn't popular in that way. And I wasn't popular for any other reason. I wasn't really a stoner or anything like that. And so I think I longed for being the center of attention, but I didn't have a lot of confidence to find it in constructive ways.
So now you get sent to the county jail for 120 days. What was that first experience actually? Your first time locked up, away from home and away from the group of individuals that you were associating with? Good
question. So I was scared, man. At the time, I was, I think, 18. I was 18 when I got arrested, 19 when I had to go into the county jail. I got to self-report to the county jail, and actually they sent me to a work release program. Well, I was dating this girl, and I would go there in the morning before work. One day I showed up there, and the apartment was empty with nothing but the phone sitting in the middle of the floor. She knew me. And then so I left there and drove to Eastern Washington, like 200 miles away, had my buddy forge a signature on the work release paper slip saying Shawn was at work today, right? And I drove 200 miles, confronted her, drove 200 miles back, walked into the work release like, hey, there's nothing wrong. Here's my slip. The guy said, turn around and put your hands on the wall. At 7 o'clock this morning, your girlfriend called us and told us you wouldn't be at work today.
Wow, she threw you under the bus. Why? Did something happen?
No, it was just, I was in the county jail and she just wasn't going to be with somebody who was a criminal. And she loaded her shit up and moved back to Eastern Washington.
And she didn't know about that before you actually got busted, that you were involved in stuff?
Yeah, not really, because we had been dating for a while. So she really, I wasn't telling people about it. Hey, I'm going to a party with my friends. And it was so childish. It wasn't like selling drugs where we'd have money or committing crime where you're going to have money, something to show for, because that's not why we did it.
The second you got arrested, did you get kicked out of the National Guard?
No, actually, that's another great question. So while I'm in the county jail, the National Guard charges me with AWOL for not going. And I got sentenced to an additional 20 days in the county jail for AWOL and given a general discharge out of the National Guard.
What is general discharge mean?
That's between honorable and dishonorable. There's a general discharge in the middle that's they call it, sometimes they call it less than honorable, or mine formally says general discharge on it.
So when you went AWOL and they charged you with that, they didn't have you serve it in like a military barracks at all?
No, they had me serve it because it was the Washington State National Guard. Mm-hmm. So they had me serve that time in the county jail. And it was funny because I was serving my time, and I just remembered this. I was serving my time in the county jail. They take me down there, and my sergeant in the National Guard said, "Get those cuffs off of him." And I'm just walking around the armory thinking, all I have to do is walk across that parking lot and just keep going.
All over 120 days.
But I didn't do it.
Yeah.
I went back to the jail, and I thought about that for a long time. Like, what if I would have ran? You
might not be sitting here right now.
Yeah,
well,
I might not
probably
be.
would have gone out by now, but you could be in a different country.
Yeah. Who knows what would happen, right?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. What was I just going to ask you? Wow, I had such a great question, and then I dropped. Oh, what do you think? Looking back on it now, if you stayed with the National Guard, what would that have been like? Do you ever think about that?
Yeah, I do a lot, and I think I don't regret anything that I've done in my life. It turned me into the human being I am today, and I'm okay with that. But there's a part of me that wishes I would have explored full-time military service. I've had lots of friends that did that, lots of people I've known that did that, and they lived a great life, and they retired at 38 or 39 or 40 years old, and they get their military retirement, and then they go out and they go to college, and they get a job, and they move on to do great things. I probably could have used the structure in my life. You know what I mean?
What about conversations with your parents when you got arrested this first time?
My father was very much somebody who took a hard line on crime. And it was very embarrassing to him when I got arrested. That's one thing I've had to forgive myself for, because he worked in the shipyard with a bunch of guys, and they knew his story, and I can only imagine what he had to go through after I was arrested.
Yeah, what was the stigma around, getting arrested, your kids getting arrested back then, especially from, coming from like a farm type country too?
Yeah. It was like all the neighbors kind of knew that we'd been in and out of trouble. The police cars show up at the house. It's not like in the city where cops pull up to your house, everybody knows, like in your case, right? They just show up in the morning with 200 police cars, and right. It was a little more discreet, but they also published it. And back then, people read the newspaper. They didn't have social media, right? So they would just read the newspaper. Oh, Shawn Myers of this address was arrested for burglary, right? It really strained the relationship with my parents.
Do you think that that time in county made you a better criminal or a worse criminal?
Well, it got me onto bank robbery.
And why is that?
So I met a guy. He's not with us anymore. He was killed in a police shootout later. His name was Shawn Sawyer.
Two Shawns.
Two Shawns. And we're completely opposite. He was about 6'4", real skinny, and I'm short and stocky guy. He was in there for bank robbery, and he told me about it. I looked at the federal sentencing guideline book. I knew how much time I would get if I got caught, and I went out and did it.
All from that time in county jail?
That's how that happened.
So if you never met this guy...
I would probably never have robbed a bank.
You know, this is like every script and every movie, like where they watch the guy.
And it gets even better because I told somebody who went and did it.
Wow. So you said you pulled the federal sentencing guidelines. How did you know that was going to be a federal crime at that point?
Because Shawn Sawyer was getting charged by the feds, and the Kitsap County Jail had a contract with the feds to hold federal prisoners. Back then, they didn't have a lot of these MDCs everywhere. So the federal prison system has changed drastically since the early 90s until now. And they didn't have MDCs everywhere. And so they didn't have an MDC in Seattle to send me to. So they contracted with county jail. So Shawn Sawyer was there, contracted, and they wore a different color uniform. They wore tan like the feds, and the rest of us were wearing orange, right? And there said federal inmate on the back. And they would, they were housed in units with everybody else. You know, housing units held about 40 people each. And man, they just mix people together. Yeah, it's the quintessential or the story that you hear about somebody goes to jail and hears how to do a crime and gets out and does it. It's exactly what happened.
What was it for you about the bank robbery that had you hooked to it? Like the idea of it when you were talking to this guy?
The excitement of it. Right? So nothing I've ever done in life's been solely about the money. It's always been the experience. And whether that's work or hobbies that I've had or this crime thing, right? And so it was a thrill, but at the same time, I watched inmates who had been to prison or going to prison. And when you're in jail, those people can be idols to people who don't have a lot of confidence or who weren't the center of attention, because they are, right? Ooh, that guy, he's been, right? That's what you hear all the time. And so for me, it was, again, going back to my high school years, not being the center of attention, but kind of wanting that. And as we got to be friends, I would say that we were friends. I aspired to have that, people looking at me in the same way, some looking up to me, whether it's in a positive way or negative way.
What exactly were his tips? Like, did he give you a list of do's and don'ts and you were writing it down?
It was, he told me about it and I thought, that can't be that hard. So, in fact, I would read the newspaper, and back then, the West Coast was like this epicenter of bank robbery. This was, in Seattle, there was Scott Spurlock, who robbed banks in the 90s up till 94, and he was killed by the feds. He had a shootout with them, and he did it with guns and masks, but 95% of bank robbers in the 90s were just passing notes. And so he was able to come into it, and he told me the story about how he did it, and I thought, that can't be that hard. And you would read the newspaper, lone white male enters the bank, here's the description, took an unknown amount of cash from the bank. It would just be a short blur, but you would see 2 or 3 every day.
Now, can you break down to the audience that there is technically 2 ways to rob a bank? One is through the method you would choose, or one is, as you were explaining, with the shootouts. Yeah.
So particularly people who are inexperienced or addicts, they're just trying to get some money for something. So most bank robberies are somebody walks into the bank with a note. In my case, I wrote on a withdrawal slip, and I'll go through the whole process. In fact, let me tell that, man. Yeah. I got up in the morning and I walked to the bank. I literally took a withdrawal slip and I used my knuckles because I was smart enough to know about fingerprints, and I dropped the withdrawal slip out. I had my own pen. I wrote, all cash fast or you die. I never touched that piece of paper with my fingerprints. I would pinch it between my fingers, stood in line with everybody else, and walked up to the counter, set the note down, and just stood there and looked at the teller. And that's how I did it. That's how most of them happen. However, there are a group of people who rob banks like they did there's a documentary, 106 Minutes or something, with that shootout in Los Angeles in the 90s. The friend of mine that Shawn Sawyer was killed, he got out of prison for bank robbery, got back into drugs, went back into a bank and robbed it. And when the cops came, he had a shootout with them, and they killed and shot him up. And so that's the difference, right? We have the people who are just passing notes for money. So
when you got out of that county jail, do you hit one the next day? Are you putting planning into it? What's that process?
Man, this is really crazy. So I got out of jail, and it was literally like a Monday or Tuesday. I got out of the county jail, and I went back to my mom's house in West Seattle. I got up the next morning at 9 o'clock, put on black shoes, black jeans, black T-shirt, black jacket, and walked 6 blocks to the bank. Walked in, took the withdrawal slip, all cash fast or you die. Stood in line, took about 10 minutes of standing in line on a Monday or Tuesday morning, and I'll never forget her name. Linda Marinkovich was the teller. I looked directly at her name, and that imprint has never left my mind. And she saw that note, and man, I feel so bad. She looked terrified, but there's no turning back at this point. And so she stacked money on the counter, and I had to tell her to stop. She was so panicked, and I'd cut the inside of my jacket out, and I was just shoving it in until no more would fit. I didn't comprehend how many 1s and 5s you could get from a bank. She just kept putting them up there. And so I ran out of the bank while I was very fit, like running 2 miles in less than 12 minutes, 100 push-ups, no problem, right? So, and from the military, right, the obstacle course. So instead of running down the streets on the sidewalks, I hopped through people's yards because they didn't have Ring cameras and cell phones in 1990, right? And so I hopped through yards until I got home, 6 blocks away, changed my clothes, got in my truck, and drove away.
Wow. Why that bank did you pick? And are you looking at the security, if they have guards? Are you staking it out?
It wasn't the first bank I walked into that morning. So I actually walked into another bank, and I got a little nervous. You'd think I would have been nervous from robbing a bank anyway, but this was one time in my life I actually got nervous. And I walked in, and I stood there for a long time, and I thought, something ain't right. I'm going to leave. And I left and just walked the next block over. And I walked in, and I looked at it, and it just looked perfect. Everyone was facing forward, just kind of minding their own business, very unaware. And so, yeah, it was crazy.
Now, with the notes, I'm assuming the surrounding people don't really know there's a robbery going on, unless like the teller is a co-teller next to her is maybe alarmed by it.
Yep, and I think looking back on it now, the way that the tellers stood there with their faces deadpan staring at me and didn't turn their head, didn't say anything, just throwing money on the counter, that would give it away. But I robbed multiple banks. On every bank robbery, as I reached the door, I heard somebody yell, "He just robbed me."
Wow. And are you picking, how do you know which teller to go to?
I'm taking whatever teller the line says.
You don't care if it's a boy or a girl?
Don't care.
Really?
Yeah.
What if he wants to play the hero?
That would have been a game time decision, right? I probably would have ran, though. I mean, live to fight another day, right? And back then and even today, bank tellers and bank employees are instructed, if you're robbed, you comply 100%, whatever they ask for. No die packs, no alarms. You don't give them die packs or alarms. And that was one thing Shawn Sawyer told me. He said, you can tell when they have a die pack in them. It feels like a brick. Bend them all. So I would bend the packs of money because you can tell the die packs were a hard plastic thing. But yeah, I would take whatever teller they gave to me. It didn't matter to me.
That first haul, how much did you get?
I want to say about $2,500. All told in the banks when we get to the end is less than $30,000 on 5 bank robberies.
That's what I've heard from most of the bank robbers
It's hardly
I
any
talk
money.
to. Yeah. And why is it hard to get an actual significant amount?
Inexperience. Had I known then that there was a second drawer with more money, I would have gotten more money. What I did get more money each bank robbery I got because I learned, okay, this first bank robbery is all 1s and 5s. I want 20s, 50s, and 100s. So the next bank robbery, so we'll just keep going with this. I robbed the first bank. About 3 days later, I said, after that first one, though, I said, I'm going to do this again because it was the adrenaline rush for me. And so that day, though, I took that money and I had that money and I went to a friend's house and I said, I got to take a shower, dude. Help me out here. And he didn't know I robbed a bank. I went in the bathroom and I took that money out and I threw it on the floor and I'm standing here staring. It looked like a lot of money. It's 1s and 5s and I was 19 years old. What do I know, right? man, the pile of money on the floor, and I said, oh, I'm going to do this again. That's literally, I said that to myself. And then, so 3 days later, I walked into another bank, one block, that bank that I went into the first morning. I went back to it, felt good, and I robbed it. Did the exact same thing. Except this time, I was so much more aware of my surroundings and sounds and noises that I can even envision today what the buzz sounded like in the bank, and the bank teller saying, next, please, and the sound of the pen writing on the note as I wrote, all cash fast or you die, on the notes. And I can, now I'm starting to be much more aware when I'm doing things like this. So the second bank, a block down from the first one, ran home, and this time my sister was home, and she knew. As soon as I cracked the door, she was standing there, and she looked at me and said, what have you been doing? Nothing. And I ran upstairs to my room, and I threw the money on the bed, and I took a shower, and I got in my truck, and I left. Well, when I left this bank, I drove up, and it's on a main intersection in West Seattle, and there were cop cars lined up, and I just drove right on past and away from West Seattle. But now I knew I couldn't stay in West Seattle.
Yeah, why did you decide to rob those so close to your home anyways?
Comfort. I think it was it's the same reason why if you watch crime shows, they always can pinpoint by the crimes where somebody's home is. It's because you don't want to venture too far.
Now, this system, do you think it could work in today's world with technology and security?
No, not at all. Everybody's got a Ring camera. Everybody's got a phone. I don't think there's much more CCTV out there.
And the feds could probably pull all of the people's data that were even in that vicinity at the time.
They can pull the phones. They knew who was there. They can have everything, and they have it so much faster than they could have ever had information.
What was the press like after the second robbery, so close next to each other?
The only I got my nickname from the second bank, so they called me the Patient Bandit.
The Patient Bandit?
Because I walked into the bank, wrote my note, stood in line, walked up to the teller, all cash fast or you die, went to leave the bank. When I opened the door, there was an old lady standing there, and I held the door open for her as she walked into the bank that I just robbed.
Wow. And you had the money in you.
I had the money in my pockets. And she said, oh, you're such a sweet young man. I held that door open. As soon as she went in, boom, I was gone.
And they weren't yelling or anything that you robbed
The
her?
lady had just yelled, he robbed me, but she was deaf and I was fast. I wasn't really overly concerned about it.
Did you ever have to show that you had a gun, keep your fingers in your pockets?
No. And I'm really glad that I didn't, because in the federal sentencing guidelines, that would have been an additional 5 years. It's an additional crime to have a firearm in possession during a bank robbery.
And that's what we were talking about in the lobby, about how I would meet guys, and I'm sure you did in the feds, where you would have one guy here for armed robbery and one guy for doing what you did, and the guy for armed robbery has minimum 10, 15 years, and then this other guy has the mandatory 5. And this guy probably has all the money hidden, and the guy that armed it got out with no money and a longer sentence.
That's right, because they have that gun. And at the time, you remember in I think it was 84, 87, the Sentencing Guidelines Act, I think it was 1987, created those guidelines. So it's literally a matrix that tells a judge how much time to sentence you.
Now, are you guys studying, or are you specifically studying other bank robberies? There was Boston's notorious for the bank robberies and all of that. You're not paying attention to anything?
No, and had the Scott Spurlock story happened prior to me robbing banks, and then somebody tells me about bank robbery in the county jail, I may have been more inclined to go that route. Because, look, the Scott Spurlock story was big news. He was all over the media. He was on the Seattle news every time he'd rob a bank for 3 or 4 days. They called him Hollywood. Yeah, look him up. Hollywood, man. He had disguises. He went in there, him and his crime partners. They had masks on. They went in with guns. They knew what they were doing. They scoped out banks for a time before they did it. Yeah.
Do you wish you wore a mask during your robberies?
No, and you know why? Because here was my theory. They didn't have facial recognition at the time, so that wasn't a deal. I knew they were going to get a picture of me. What I didn't know was that they would get a picture of me that was as clear. I got a little scar right here. Yeah, that picture showed up. So all that grainy stuff they show on TV ain't real. They get real good pictures. But I knew that without information to match me, Shawn Myers, to that photo is useless.
But your family, did they see the photos at all?
They never put the photos. All it was a short blurb in the newspaper. Lone white male enters the West Seattle branch of Sea First Bank on this day and left with an undisclosed amount of cash.
Wow, not even in the local paper blown up the face. Have you seen this man?
Nope.
Wow. Do you think that would have stopped your spree right then?
Oh, I would have been busted.
Yeah.
My mother and her partner live in West Seattle. They would have seen that and said, and my mom would have told on me.
She would have turned you in?
Oh, yeah. She would have, and she should have, right?
So now, what about tracing the bills? Are they traced back then at all?
So there is a bundle of bills, or there were at the time. They put die packs, and they were just starting to use tracers in the 90s. In fact, that's how they caught Scott Spurlock, is a tracer following the van with the money in it. What they used a lot of was die packs back then that would, if you left the bank, it was had a perimeter, when it wasn't getting a signal, it would blow up, and pink or blue or yellow dye would explode everywhere and smoke would come out. So there were guys I was in jail with who had die packs explode on them while they were running.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Now, what about the third robbery? What happens after in between the second and third? Now that you're moving in a different, you decide to go out of your city.
Yeah. So now I'm getting to that third one. On that second one, I said to myself, I'm going to do this as much as I can until they catch me. Right. I'm going to keep, and it was totally the adrenaline for me. Right. I'm an adrenaline junkie. And this is, you want to get your heart rate fired up, run into a bank and rob it once, right? So I knew I couldn't do that anymore. So this third bank robbery is pretty interesting. I went to the Northgate Mall, which was on the north end of Seattle, kind of far out from where I lived. And I rode the bus out there, and it was attached to the mall. And I walked into that bank the same way as I did it, but I was more nervous because I knew I couldn't run all the way back to West Seattle. Didn't have that comfort. But I was gutsy, man. I just went in just like I did before. And this bank I got the most money out of, which was about, I want to say $9,000 to $12,000. It was kind of a peak high for me. So I go in, but the teller stopped for a minute. And I literally said, if you don't give me the money, I'm going to jump over this counter and fucking take it myself. Instantly, that terrified look, and she started piling money on the counter. And again, I shoved it until I couldn't shove no more. I was like hundreds and 50s and 20s, and I'm shoving it in as fast as I can. I told her, stop. That's too much money. I can't do this. So I left the bank, and I ran straight across, imagine a mall parking lot, right, with cars. So I ran zigzag through the parking lot, and I ran out, and I went into a small supermarket, and I bought a soda with this bulging jacket full of bills, right? And it's really puffy because they're not stacked. They're just shoved in there. And so I buy a soda, and I ask the person working checkout, I said, hey, can you call me a cab? Oh, yeah, no problem. Called a cab. And I went outside and I stood there for a minute and I thought, oh, shit. That's probably a bad idea because now they can, hey, did somebody call a cab from here? So I ran out of the store, took off down the street. Well, it was kind of an alley-type street. Imagine cities, right? Alley-type street. And a police car turned straight toward me. And I, no joke, said, because there's not much room on either side, I said, if they turn their lights on, I'm going right over the top of this car. I'm just going to keep running. And as I keep jogging like I'm jogging, it was a female police officer. She kind of pulled over and let me right by. Just by the time she got to the end of the alley, she flipped on her sirens. But then I thought, she can't have a description that quick. It's not possible. So I just kept jogging. I went to a bus station. Bus pulled up, jumped on the city bus, rode the city bus until I could get to a bigger bus station, and then went home with this big, puffy thing full of money, bills and terrified. I sat on that bus sweating like a crack addict, just sweat pouring off me. And I had to sit there for 30 minutes till I could get back toward West Seattle to go home, you know.
Why didn't you want to bring a bag or anything?
I viewed it like I don't want something in my hand, right? If I'm going to have to run and jump over fences and run, I want my hands free.
Did money ever fall out?
No, I didn't lose any money. It was stuffed in that jacket inside my coat, okay. You know. It was October in Seattle, so it was wet and rainy, and so it kind of fit in with the coat, you know.
Did you have a certain branch or a chain you would rob, or was it all a variety?
Yeah, it was Seafirst Bank at the time. They don't have them anymore now. I use the names of the new banks if people ask me now, so they know where it was, you know. But Seafirst Bank, I robbed 3 of those.
Were you allowed to bank there after, or no?
You know what? So when we get to like when I got out, getting out of jail, I was terrified to go to a bank, period. And we talk about, you know, I was on paper for 3 years too. And I was like, I got to have a bank account. I even asked my parole officer, this gal, I said, do I just go to the bank? You just go to the bank and get a bank account like everybody else. It felt so weird walking into a bank again. It was the weirdest feeling.
So now do you commit a 4th one, or are you caught after the 3rd?
Oh, no, I'm not done yet.
Okay, let's hear about the 4th.
So the next day, I went back to West Seattle because that made me feel heebie-jeebie right now. And now I'm not living at my mom's. I went and stayed in hotels. So I'm staying in a hotel by the SeaTac airport, but I felt really comfortable. I parked my truck in front of my mom's. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to run through the yards. And I walked into a Seafirst Bank branch, and there was a man sitting there with a newspaper, just like a chair like I'm sitting in now. And I walked up to the counter, and I wrote my note, and he didn't move. And he sat there. Now I'm in the bank 5 or 6 minutes, and the line is extraordinarily long this time. And I'm standing there, and I keep looking at this guy and he's not moving. He's not flipping pages. He's just sitting there. And I thought, you're shitting me. That cannot be like law enforcement. I was only 1 or 2 more people, and I said, oh, I forgot my ID, and I left. Come to find out that was an FBI agent. They'd put him on that street to a couple FBI agents looking for me, seeing if I'd come back to there. So I left that area, went into another bank. It's kind of the same West Seattle, but farther up the street. Robbed the bank, and talk about terrified. It was the first time that I ever really got scared robbing a bank because a guy did try to follow me, and I heard him yelling, hey, you, stop. And then I thought to myself really quickly, man, I can run 2 miles in just over 11 minutes. That fool ain't going to catch me. Boom, 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 through the yards. And then my mom's neighbor, yelled at me because I came from her front yard, jumped over her fence. She's in the yard doing yard work. And I'm like, oh, hey, how you doing? Boom, back over the fence. And she's yelling at me through the fence, don't jump over my fence. She was an older lady, right? Don't jump over my fence. And so I went in then through the basement door and back up and ended up getting in my truck and driving away. And each time I robbed one in West Seattle, I would drive close enough I could look up the street and see the cop cars.
Don't you think that you were causing or bringing a little bit more heat to you by robbing the same branch, the same type of same chain? Because that FBI agent wasn't going to be maybe at a different one.
Yeah, he was in it. It was another Seafirst Bank, and he was in it, right, sitting there. And I didn't find out about that until I got arrested. But yeah, I think more heat came because I robbed them on the same street. I robbed 3 banks that are literally one corner, second corner, third corner. 3 banks I robbed right there in a row.
What was going through your mind after pulling off 3? Do you feel like you're untouchable, invincible now?
Yeah, in fact, I kept saying it to myself, I'm going to do this every day until I get caught. And it was, man, I don't remember the day, but something happened and I didn't get to rob that there was a day between that 3rd bank and that 4th bank I just told you about. And yeah, I was feeling like they're not going to catch me, right? I could probably do 50 or 60 of these. And then I even thought, once I burn up Seattle, I'm just going to go to Portland. Right? Like I can just get in my car and drive around. I can go burn up, until I get caught.
How are you living? What were you spending the money on?
Strippers. Cocaine? No. I still hadn't done any hard drugs, but I was drinking a little bit more than I were before. And I was spending it at strip joints. You know, I'd go to a strip joint. I'd go out with my buddies, the guys I told you about before, and we'd go drinking. I would pay for everything at a strip club. And if I didn't have any money, I know where I'm going to get more.
Did your friends know that you were this bank robber?
Nobody knew.
So no one knew?
No one knew, and I knew better than to tell anybody, which I screwed up later on.
Imagine if you were on drugs during this time period. That would have been... You wouldn't have made it past the first one.
No, I wouldn't have.
Wow.
No.
So you're following all the rules. You know what you have to do to keep pulling off these heists. What happens next after that third one?
So I'm staying out by the airport in hotels, and I'm moving hotels every 1 or 2 days. That way they don't see me too many times. One person at the counter doesn't see me, and then it does come up on the news. That person's staying in this room, right? And so I'm staying there, and it was a Saturday morning. It was on October 20th, 1990. And I could see a bank across the street from the hotel that I was staying in. So I waited, got up, all black again like normal, walked into the bank, robbed it, ran back over to the hotel room, sat in the hotel room with the money on the bed, watching the cops show up to the bank. And then they start fanning out and looking, and of course, now they know there's a pattern. They know what the guy kind of looks like. And so now they're just, hey, this guy's run. If we gave him a minute, he's a mile away, right? And so how far can I go in that period of time, right? And there's no way. It takes them 5 or 10 minutes to all get to the bank and coordinate what they're going to do. If you're not carrying a tracer or have a dye pack explode or somebody followed you, it's pretty tough for them to catch you back then because, again, no one had cell phones. No one had ring cameras. Right, there wasn't as much CCTV back then.
How are you making sure you weren't being tailed, if you were at all?
So I wasn't really. My theory was that if I jumped things like ran through people's neighborhoods and through patches of woods, that alone would keep 95% of anybody from even trying to attempt to follow me. Right.
So we know obviously how this ends. You didn't get away with it. What was the fatal mistake that got you caught?
Yeah, so a couple of days, well, this is kind of how the FBI got my name was there was a guy that I was also in county jail with Shawn Sawyer with. And he called me up, right? I'd given him my number, and he called my mom's house. And so I ended up getting connected with him, and we went and got drunk. And we were sitting at a bar who wasn't, and I was a baby face. How they served me beer, I don't never know. But I sat there and drank. And then we literally had to drive like a half a mile to his house, but I was going like 5 miles an hour. I was so drunk. And then we got to talking, and I said, yeah, man, I robbed a bunch of banks. No, you didn't. Yeah. I said, but you can't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody. The next day, he was arrested for breaking a coin machine at a car wash. And you know the story from here, right? He says, hey, woo-hoo, if you don't give me my parole violation, I'll tell you who's robbing those banks. And so I robbed that last bank on October 20th. That it all went down on like maybe October 15th, 16th, 17th, somewhere. I'd said, hey, I robbed a bank, right? And so he told, and then they, of course, got my booking photo, and then they got the bank photos, and they're like, oh, yeah.
Wow. So what happens next once they put the pieces together?
So this is I'd say the saddest part of my story. The day I robbed that last bank, same day my sister died. She was 19 years old. So I was 20 at the time, and I got a page. I had a pager, and my mom paged me, and I went to the hospital 12 hours after I robbed that bank, and went to the hospital, and she passed away that night. Well, then my father, who was out of town hunting in eastern Washington, we called my grandparents' house, and I said, Dad, you got to come home. She passed away while he was driving, and then so I was in the hospital. I had to tell him, hey, man, Kim didn't make it. And so I went home with him, and I stayed there for a couple of days until her funeral. Then I was arrested at her funeral in the cemetery for bank robbery by the FBI.
So they were staking out the whole cemetery.
Yeah, man. In fact, what a great way to be able to wear suits and no one know, right? But when, you told your story, I listened to you on Matthew Cox's podcast, right? And you tell about how they came at 6 a.m. Dude, I couldn't believe how many FBI agents were there. It was unreal. 2 of them after the service was over, and I have to credit the FBI. I think they knew who I was before the 20th. They waited until after that funeral. They gave me that.
Do you think they did it for that? Or?
I think they did it intentionally. I think they knew, look, this guy's not going to rob another bank. We know where he's at right now. Let's let him have this. And then as soon as the service was over, I turned to walk back. I was riding with my father. I turned to walk back. 2 guys came up beside me, grabbed my arms and said, "Shawn Myers, you're under arrest." And man, they put my wrists behind my back all the way to my upper neck. And I thought my shoulders were going to rip out. And all of a sudden I saw, and I'm a pretty aware person, but from every tree there were county sheriffs and police, city police and FBI agents and all these. And I look and there's all these black cars all over the place. And I'm like, oh, fuck, this is bad. This is bad. And they scooped me up at the funeral. My mom's brother-in-law came up and said, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" And they said, "Step back. Shawn's under arrest." And my uncle said, "What the fuck for?" And they said, "Bank robbery." And I turned and looked at him and his face was like, and it was in my mind, it was so dead silent at that minute. They put me in an SUV, had 2 cops, 1 on each side of me and 1 guy driving, and off they went. As soon as we got away from the funeral, they transferred me to an FBI car with 1 FBI agent and 1 in the front and took me to the Seattle FBI office.
Do you remember the look on your dad's face when this was happening?
I didn't see my mother or my father. I literally, everybody started, how they do, and turned to walk away, and cops were on me. And and when they were escorting me from where I was standing to the car, they weren't letting me have any time. They were hot-footing it. They literally were half carrying me. So they were running with me. Get me in the car, get me out of there.
Looking back on it, would you have robbed another bank again, or was your sister's death enough to
No, man, I would have kept robbing banks. Those are 2 independent events, mutually exclusive. I easily would have went to robbing banks. In fact, I probably would have done it. We buried her on the 25th of October, and I probably would have done it the 26th.
Now, if you never told that guy, do you think you would have been caught anytime soon?
No, I think I would have got away with it a little bit more. I think living in hotels, I was really mobile. I just had 1 bag of clothes. I think I probably would have got away with it until they put me on TV or a picture in the newspaper. Once that picture happened, I would have been busted.
That adrenaline rush that does more than any drug can do for you. Like, I remember, when I was at the prison camp, literally escaping to escape permanently, but
to go get food, right?
Yeah. But that feeling that I experienced, I'm sure is what you experienced.
It is.
And it almost debilitates you, but it keeps you going at the same time. It's just no other feeling like it. It's crazy, which is why I can understand when you're shot or anything like that adrenaline rush, you don't really feel anything in that moment.
After each bank robbery and even today telling the story, my heart races. I would imagine people who crave cocaine or methamphetamines, right? I can feel how my heart beat and how my breath was and how it felt in the back of I can feel it right now. A little bit of dry throat, that adrenaline is running through me. And I don't think most people understand unless you felt that type of adrenaline, how powerful that is.
Now at the FBI office, do they start questioning you right away? Yeah. And are you open or are you lawyering
I cop to it.
Okay.
I still, I am a baby-faced 20-year-old kid. I look like I was 16, right? They haul me in there and the FBI agent, and at first I'm trying to be a smart ass, and he says, they sit me down and they said, "Hey, Okay, we want to question you. They take your shoelaces. Of course, I'm wearing a suit, so they take my belt, they take my shoelaces away, and they handcuff me to this chair. It's a small conference room table, and they pop me down in there, and takes them about an hour, and they come back. Well, it's the end of the day, so they're trying to get me to the county jail so that they can go home, right? And so I'm sitting there, and they said, look, we don't have a lot of time. We got you. You want to cop to it? And I said, nah, it's not me. They act like they were going to pack me up. I said, okay. He slid a picture across the table to me, and it was of the second or third bank robbery, and there's a picture of only like maybe this much of my face, like a 4x6 section, and that scar is visible. This is in 1990. Those cameras in banks are better than they show on TV. And that scar was so visible, I'm like, yeah, you guys got me. And they knew that I had done 3. They actually originally picked me up for 3. And I was stupid. I said, hey, you going to ask me about the other 2? I didn't know. You know what I mean? I thought you guys, and oh, well, there's one more in between here and one more there, because not one of the descriptions of me are even remotely close. Male 5'7" to 5'9", long brown hair, brown leather jacket, plaid shirt, and blue jeans. I wore black all 5 times. But eyewitness testimony isn't all that great. When somebody's scared, they're not, you met me, I'm 5'5" on a good day, right? All of them had me taller, bigger than I was, right?
The camera footage thing's so interesting. I wonder if they do that on purpose, because like when I see like when the police publish stuff now of robberies, it looks so like your iPhone quality is better than these cameras. And I wonder if they just do that on purpose to show that, you know, that they think that they don't know this person.
It is. I think so. There's got to be more to it, because there's other cases where somebody was arrested and the seam of the jeans had a specific pattern, and so they had a picture of that section and they matched it to jeans from somebody's closet.
Yeah.
So they're better than they think.
Now, do you know how much time you're facing when you're sitting down with them the first time, or does that come after?
I knew that I was going to get somewhere around 7 or 8 years of time.
Okay.
That they'd sentence me to. I knew in my head.
So what happens after you confess to the whole thing? Do they assign you an attorney?
Okay, so I confessed right there to the FBI. They took me to the county jail in Everett, Washington, which is the Snohomish County Jail, which is bigger than the county jail I'd been at in Kitsap County. And they take me there, and they have different wings. And so since I'd never been to prison, they put me in a wing with a bunch of people who were awaiting trial who hadn't been to prison. So I come in there, now I've got the tan on and not the orange on, right? And so people are looking, now I got that attention. Remember I told you that attention? People are like, you rob banks? Ooh, tell me about that. But when I first got there, I actually had strep throat, so I was sick, and I didn't know it. Well, after a couple days, I couldn't. It was so crowded that you would have to lay on floors for like 3 or 4 months before you could get a cell. That's how overcrowded the jail was. And I laid there a couple of days. I didn't even get up to eat. The infection was so bad. And finally, the cop said, look, you're going to medical tonight. We got to get you in there. So they came down and took me. I had really bad strep throat. And they got that cleaned up. But it took 3 or 4 months, and it wasn't anything like the Kitsap County Jail, because there were more fights. It was more in the city. It's not like L.A. County Jail, obviously, or not like Rikers, but there was a lot more fights and things like that going on. And so now I was a little more scared, because this isn't like the Kitsap County Jail. People are saying, you better get ready to fight.
Yeah, was there gang activity at all in those counties? In the county jails?
Yeah, and so Seattle had a lot of Crips and Bloods, obviously, at the time. They kept them separate, just like most county jails do. They keep them separate. The gangs were primarily Latino gangs and black gangs were the gangs. There were a few motorcycle clubs in the area, and occasionally you'd see somebody. But the way they segregated us, if you'd been to prison before and you're awaiting trial or you're on a probation hold or something, they had a whole separate wing for you. And the concept was to keep experienced people away from inexperienced people, in the hopes that this storytelling doesn't lead to more crimes.
Were you asking around while you were in the county what to expect? Because you're a young white kid in this county jail saying, hey, what do I expect in the feds? How do I move? This
Lots of people would tell me, like, look, dude, you're going to have to fight, right? It's going to be, it's not going to be like you think. And most of these people had been to state prison, not federal prison, and there is a difference for those of us who've been to feds and state prison. And I think at the time there was a lot. Federal prison up until the 90s didn't have as many gang members, didn't have as many lower type crimes, lots of financial crimes, RICO cases. Lots of people I was in prison with were serving RICO cases. So there was a lot of that, but not a lot of theft and drug sales unless you were like a big time drug kingpin or something, right? You really had to do something like in your case, right? It was kind of a low amount for the feds, right?
Yeah, the dollar amount was ridiculous, especially for a trial, too.
Right, exactly.
They spent more prosecuting me, chasing me, and the trial
than the whole amount was. Yeah. So, in this one, they tried to keep you separated, but I would ask people, and I heard enough stories. I knew I was going to have to fight.
Now, you weren't thinking that you would go to a low-security prison? Because your thing wasn't violent at all. What was your thought process?
You know what? There was none on where I would end up. I knew I was going to go to prison, and I'd heard and, of course, seen on TV all the different levels of prison, from camps to maximum security prisons. There was a lot of that. And so I kind of knew what it was like, but I never really gave thought to, am I going to a camp? Am I going to a medium? Right?
So how long does the legal process take to play out for you?
I was arrested on October 20th, and I was sentenced on February 12th, I believe.
Which is very quick for the feds.
I raised my hand. I pled guilty. I said, I'm guilty. I met with an attorney. They assigned me an attorney right away. Met with an attorney. We talked about the case. I said, hey, I know what I'm in for. What I didn't count on was what's called the expressed threat of death. That "or you die" that I wrote, they did get one of my notes. Because she threw so much money up there, I just forgot about my notes I was taking. But because I used that, it was 2 more points. So if you've seen the sentencing guidelines matrix, the top line is your criminal history. Well, because I'd had the burglary charge and stuff, I classified as level 3, middle of the board, but I had 26 points because robbery is 18 points, 20 points, or 2 more points for financial institution. Number of crimes took me to like 27, and then they gave you 1 point off if you pled guilty.
Yeah, for accepting responsibility.
So I had 26 points on the downscale, which was 78 to 97 months.
And then your age didn't help when it comes to designation and everything because you're really young.
I was, so...
Because there's 2 systems. You have the sentencing points and then your points on where they classify
where they're going to classify you, which happens from your PSI, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it was... But I wasn't scared. I don't get nervous or scared of things.
Was your family supportive during that time?
No. My neither one of my parents would talk to me. I didn't talk to either one of them. My mom probably for a year. My mom's partner wrote me a couple letters, and I wrote back and forth with her for a while, and I was super thankful that she was willing to do that because I had nobody to write me letters. You know, my brother and sisters would occasionally. And my next youngest brother, he came to visit me in the county jail and stuff. He was pretty active in staying in contact with me.
Did you speak at your sentencing?
I did. At your sentencing, of course, you have to allocute, right? So I stood up and said, I did this, and hey, I apologize. And ironically, the judge, because it was so controlled by the Sentencing Guidelines Act, she was pissed off, and she said, I would not sentence you to this if I didn't have to. She went on a whole tirade for like 15 minutes about how the Senate had taken away a judge's power to judge, and she said, you are too young. You are 20 years old, right? I had just turned 21 while I was in jail. And she was very adamant that she did not believe in the sentencing guidelines. But the book is the book. the prosecution would have appealed it. I would have been brought back in for sentencing, and they would have sentenced me within 78 to 97 months.
Looking at the evidence, do you think you could have won at a jury trial? Because they didn't have much, did they? Did they have fingerprints?
Man,
or
they had
anything,
those
DNA?
photos.
Do you think the photos there wouldn't have been any reasonable doubt? They couldn't have found someone that looked kind of like you in the county?
Right,
I don't know.
Maybe, right?
That's just one piece to the puzzle, you know?
Yeah.
They didn't catch you at, maybe that's what they were waiting for aside from the funeral. They wanted to see if you'd rob again. Because there's nothing better, you know?
Nothing better than catching somebody in the act.
Yeah.
Right?
Because on an outsider's perspective, they didn't have much. They just had the photo.
I never really put any thought into that.
Yeah. I wonder what that outcome would have been. So how much,
I don't know.
What was your final sentence?
78 months.
78
Yeah,
months.
she sentenced me to the bottom end of the guidelines. So 78 months plus 3 years probation. The total that I got out of the banks, again, I think it's $29,000 out of 5 banks. Ordered restitution, obviously, and of course the 3 years of paper.
Have you paid back the restitution?
I paid back everything but a few $100 of it. And when you get when you're on probation, you send it to the court who disperses the money. When you get off probation, and my probation officer said, well, you got to call the banks and ask to set up a payment plan. The only bank that I owed that few $100 left to was Washington Mutual. And they said, we've got our insurance money. We don't want shit from you. It would be too much work for them to try and figure out how to do that.
Wait, you didn't have to pay the financial litigation unit or anything?
They didn't have that.
Oh, they didn't have that back then? Wow, interesting.
No, I had to pay restitution every month based on my income every month while I was in jail. And I'm a hard worker, so, I wanted to get a job, and I did that.
So once you get sentenced, they bring you back to county until they pick you up to take you to your actual spot?
Yeah. So now I've got a cell, and it's cold, right? So it's the wintertime, and of course you're just a cinder block wall away from the outside, laying on a concrete slab with a 2-inch thick plastic encased mattress, right? And it took them 2 weeks to come get me. It was all it took from my sentencing. And so they come knocking at 2:00 in the morning, and of course I'm bundled up in blankets and I'm shivering cold, right? And they come and get me, and I'm happy because the day room area is warmer than your cells. I'm getting out, and wherever we're going, it's going to be warm. So they chain you up and they march you downstairs, and then you sit in these holding cells in the county jail for probably a couple of hours, and this bus pulls up, right? And they march you out and put you on a bus. Of course, they black box everybody. And, for those of you that don't know, a black box is basically a plastic box that goes over your cuffs, and it takes away your ability to flex your elbows out. So you have to sit like this. Well, so they put me on the bus and take us to what's called Boeing Field, or I think they might call it King County Regional Airport or something now. And Con Air shows up, and there's all these buses in circles, and Con Air shows up, and they back that plane up, and they, that ramp comes down. Now, this is the old one. I don't know what they have now. It was white with 2 thin blue stripes and no tail number on it. And they back up, and people start getting off the bus, and they take people off the buses to go on the plane. They don't tell you where you're going. There's none of that information. So now I'm like, I wonder where I'm going, I'm getting ready to go get on the plane. No plane ride for me. So they load all the people, and the cops around this thing. It's like guarding the president, because I don't know who's on that plane, and it probably came from El Reno, right? and you've experienced El Reno, but it came from probably El Reno, and all these buses are dropping people off and picking people up, and then off they go, and that plane pulls away, and you're down the highway.
Yeah, it's quite a scene. It's literally exactly like on Con Air, like that
the movie.
Yeah,
it is
they
exactly,
depict it perfect.
They hit it on the head with that.
Except for the actual plane itself, that was
a
little bit.
that wasn't quite right.
Yeah, because on the federal Con Air, you're there with the worst of the worst, and they're not in separate cages or anything.
Yeah.
So if they want to bring that plane down, they'll find a way to bring it down.
Find a way to bring it down. Yeah. Convict ingenuity, right?
So they put you on the bus, and then where did they take you to?
They took me to Federal Correctional Institution in Sheridan, Oregon. And because they don't tell you, they didn't tell us anything. Even when we got on the bus, there was no, hey, you're going to FCI Sheridan. There was none of that. So FCI Sheridan at the time had been open for a couple of years. It's a medium security. A couple high-profile inmates there, but mostly people who either didn't classify into maximum or low. You're going to go to medium, and they do that on a point system. Very similar to your crime system, how they do it in the sentencing guidelines book. They take all of your criminal history and they work through a matrix and they come up with where you're at in terms of points. And because of mine, I was safely in the medium. So they send me to this FCI Sheridan. Of course, the bus pulls up outside the gate and it looks like a college campus. It's got these housing units and these nice paths with trees. And I'm thinking, this might not be so bad. So, of course, black box in your chains, and we go into the same place where the shoe is at FCI Sheridan. And, of course, they have all the intake questions. Fill out this clipboard, and they ask you about your gang affiliation and your crimes and where your family's from. You have to fill out all this stuff. Took all day sitting there. And there was only like 6 of us. They're in no hurry, right? They got to go do chow. They just keep you locked in that box until they come back. And so about right after the 4 o'clock stand-up count, because those of us in the feds know about that, right? So right after the 4 o'clock stand-up count, they come get us and they take us, walk down this. You got your little bedroll. You don't have any personal property because you came from county and they don't let you take anything but your paperwork. I've heard lots of your folks say, paperwork. So I got my paperwork. That's my keys to the yard, right? So I got my paperwork in my bundle, and they take us to a housing unit, and they put me in 2B. And it's kind of a bi-level triangle shape, maybe 120 cells in there. 120 individual cells. And the center of the triangle is kind of open. They got a TV, and they've got TV rooms in the corners. Well, they take you up the first set of stairs, and that's where the CO's office is at. And they tell you to get a toothbrush, toothpaste, and a bar of soap. So the toothpaste was one of those little tiny tubes, right?
The Bob Barkers.
Yeah, exactly. And a toothbrush that had been sawed in half. Right, so you can't make a shank out of it.
It's like a little thumb.
Yep, it's like a little thumb. It's about how big it is. So, but I'll never forget. I opened that drawer and the soap was Dial soap, and to this day, you know how you get those memories when you smell something. If I smell a bar of Dial soap or I walk through the store, I take myself right back to that day in the spring of 1991 when I opened that drawer up and Dial soap smell hit me in the face. It reminds me of that every time I smell that soap.
Yeah, for me it's the Irish Spring soap because that was such a popular one, the green bar. Yes, I've never seen that until I got to prison.
Right.
So who did they put you in a cell with that first time?
Yeah, so man, I always look back on my life and I think about people who were guiding me in the right direction. Well, they put me in a cell with a guy named Gary Doc Dash. Doc is probably one of the smartest human beings I've ever met in my life. He was just a very interesting individual from the Pacific Northwest, and he's got his own story to tell, but he's an interesting guy, and they put me in a cell with Doc. And Doc's about 45 and I'm 21. And he works as a clerk in the food service. He's a clerk, does all the food ordering, but he was also super intelligent and was doing paperwork for people, helping people with court cases. And he's actually helped many people get out of jail. And he had a 35-year sentence for making methamphetamines. And so he'd already served a bunch of his time at this point. So Gary was and is, I went to see him, in fact, a couple of months ago. He's got Parkinson's, but I went and see him and spent the day with him because he's been out a couple of years. But, man, was he an interesting guy. Talk about the stories and the shit he's seen and who he's been involved with, because he always was one of the guys trying to put himself in the right spot to do something.
What was his reaction to you entering the cell? Because it's always those first awkward moments when you're going in, you're sizing the person up.
So he actually wasn't home. He was still up in food service, and so after chow, it was when he came back. So I wouldn't go in there. I was going to say I'm going to wait till he shows up, and he came up with his books, marching, and he's kind of a tall guy, about 6'4", 6'5" maybe, and he had long hair, but it was great, and the big mustache that came down. I mean, he fit the convict look, right? And as soon as he stopped and he said, "You're my new bunkie, eh?" And I said, "Yep, come on in." So I take my bedroll and I go in there and throw it on the top bunk, and he spent the next 2 hours just learning about me. Really a great guy, open, funny. You're going to get along fine here. Here's what you don't do.
What were the things he told you not to do?
Man, he said, this is what he told me. He said, "Don't gamble, don't do drugs, and don't mess with the queers." That's what he said. He said, "You will be fine at a medium security if you don't do those things."
So that's just been around forever.
That's it, right? Just don't. But, we all do that anyway. It doesn't matter, right? Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, that was the first person they put me in Sultan. We got along great. He helped me get a job in food service while I was waiting to get into Unicor, Federal Prison Industries. He got me a job up there in the bakery, and he liked it because I worked at night and he worked during the day. So I would go up there at night and work in the bakery and make the donuts and the cinnamon rolls and stuff. And the deal with getting some food out of the kitchen, he helped me out with, hey, he knows that guy. That's who you go to when they shake you down before you head back to the unit. And I'd smuggle food back and make some cheesecakes and, when we'd have donut day, I'd bring a stack of donuts back and sell donuts for $1 a piece.
That's always the best when you and your cellmate are on separate schedules.
Oh, it's the greatest.
Because then you get free time to yourself and you're not on each other's asses. And food service, when there's a lockdown, you can still go out.
You still get to go out.
Yeah.
And so, but he also told me about, I've heard how you pee in prison, right? You just don't stand up and let it splash all over. So, hey, those of us who've done some time, we sit down and pee. And it might seem weird as a man saying that, but hey, Sully's got a point.
Was that weird to you when he told you that?
Oh, yeah. It was because you didn't have to do that in the county because it was a communal toilet. Oh, and it wasn't in your cell.
What was the age difference between you two?
About 23 or 24 years.
That probably did you better in the long run, having an old head to kind of show you the ropes. Because imagine if you went in there with someone your age who was more hot-headed or involved in stuff. That would have been a whole different scenario for you.
Well, being a young guy, and I would hang out with other young guys outside of the cell, right out on the yard. We'd lift weights or whatever we were doing, right? And I'd play softball and stuff. But, man, I was like, he told me, he said, "Man, don't argue with the cops. It's not going to get you anywhere." I did it anyway. I ended up they would tell us we had to have our bed made by, 8 o'clock in the morning. Well, I worked all night. Well, so one day I told the cop, "You know what? Fuck you. I'm going to sleep. I'm going to sleep here or I'm going to sleep in the shoe." That was the first time I went to the shoe. Lost 15 days of good time and had to spend 7 days in the shoe.
Oh, man. What was the shoe like in that facility?
It was not too bad. It was more like some county jails where it's a solid door, and I call it the bean trap. You got the bean trap, and you got the little glass that you can look out of, and there's two people in a cell, and they put me in a cell with this other young guy, and of course now we're doing shit like you're not supposed to, keeping people awake and drawing on the walls and shit like that, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
So how long were you at that facility for?
I was there less than a year.
Why did you stay there only less than a year?
So, man, I had this guy I hung out with, Devin. And, man, Devin was this other guy about my size, real small, young guy. He was maybe 2 years older than me. But this guy had more girlfriends than anybody I'd ever met. And he wasn't a particularly handsome guy, but he just had girlfriends coming to visit him. And he tells me, "Hey, man, I got this girl coming to visit. Can I borrow your shoes?" So by this time, the prison had started to get overcrowded. It's now fall or winter of 1991, and the prison's getting a little overcrowded. And so they put bunks out in that common area. And he was staying there, so he takes the shoes and lays out his clothes, and he goes to the shower. A couple minutes later, he comes to my cell, and he says, "Those shoes got stolen." And my heart sank because I know what's going to have to happen. And so... Devin and I, we started asking around everybody that would tell us. Finally, this guy came by and he said, "I know who did it. Here's who did it. Mondo and Peanut." I said, "All right." So I found Mondo. He's in the TV room while I looked in there, and he's sitting there with all his buddies. These guys are both Crips. They're sitting in there with their buddies, all surrounding these two, and I said, "They're guilty." So we tried to get him that night. We went in there and we both got some shanks. And man, you're going to get into a knife fight. We used to tape National Geographics. This is not it's funny, but it's not funny, right? Tape National Geographics to your chest and back around your kidneys so you can't stab through one. So we went in there and he wouldn't get up and come out of what they call TV room, right? It's not much bigger than this space. You can fit about 8 or 10 guys and has a TV mounted in the corner. And he wouldn't come out. Okay. So went back to my cell and Doc told me, he said, "You want to get that guy? Put some water in that bowl." We had these plastic bowls that had a screw-on lid. Put some water in there, throw a teddy bear full of honey in it, handful of salt, put it in the microwave and wait till it boils. And so okay. So went to bed that night. Me and Devin made a plan. We're going to their cell in the morning. So 6 o'clock, which as soon as the guard starts turning the first lock, the guys in the open area, in the day room area, they just jump out of their racks because they have to stay on their rack until that time. He cracks that first lock. Devin went to the microwave, put the bowl of stuff in the microwave. My door was cracked. I stepped out on the tier and I left my door open so the cop couldn't see me going that direction. Down I went. By the time I got there, that water was boiling. I took it and Devin opened the door and I threw it in on him. And we went into that room and I hit that guy with two padlocks that were in the bottom of a couple socks. And I tied it up in a knot and I used other socks and tied it to my wrist so he couldn't take it away from me. And we beat those guys so bad that one of them almost died. And he had, I want to say, 170 stitches in his head. And it's making my heart race thinking about it now because that every person came out of their cells and that guy was big. He was a big guy and he pushed Devin and I out the cell. And he couldn't see because I hit him in the face with those locks and it split his face open pretty bad. And he got on top of Devin and I kept hitting him. Inadvertently hit Devin in the top of the head once. He had to get a bunch of stitches too. And Peanut came, his cellie, who was about my size, and I chased him off and came back and hit the guy some more. And man, at one point I remember I turned around and every CO and FCI Sheridan was standing there. And they were just surrounding me waiting for me to stop, which was amazing to me because a couple more whacks, the guy could have been dead. And so I put my hands behind my back. They handcuffed me and took me back to the shoe.
Wow. Something that stuck out there, too, that I want to touch on is that you said you knew what you had to do when those shoes got stolen. In those situations, this is a perfect example of prison forces you to do things that you don't want to do. You didn't have a choice in that way. Like, there was you can't go to the guard and say, "Hey, he stole my shoes."
Well, you can, right?
You could, but that would change your whole...
That would have changed the trajectory. And I think that was a very somber moment in my life, and you can tell by the tone at which I talk about it, right? Because there's nothing like sitting in a shoe, and they put us in there single-celled, so I couldn't be with anyone else, wondering if the person I just assaulted will die. And if that person dies, I might not ever get out of prison. But I say this when we talk about prison because prison has a very unique dynamic where there's rules written by the BOP, there are rules that inmates give you, and then we each have our conscience. My conscience, I knew that I could take somebody's life. I knew that I was going to assault this guy at a minimum, and I would be okay with it because the outcome, had I not, would have made the next 5.5 years of my prison sentence much worse than they were.
Would you take that decision to attack that guy?
No, I would not take it back today because I would still be at a medium prison and be everybody's bitch. Because I had a guy come up to me once, and not long before this happened, and I could tell he was rolling up on me like he was going to try and I was selling some heroin. I had a little bit of hustle there, and he came up to see if I had any left. and he had his gloves on and his jacket, and in June, right? And I said, I ain't got any left, and he turned around and walked away. So imagine what that would have been like. Like, what do you do for hustle? People aren't going to pay you, right?
How long were you in the shoe for after that incident?
Yeah, so, in the BOP, they got to write you your shot pretty soon. So I received a shot 101 for serious bodily injury. So it's the second worst shot you can get. Only thing worse than that is murdering another inmate. They put me in the shoe, and we were in there for about, in fact, Doc was you can ask for an inmate advisor, right? And I said, hey, Gary Dash. And he just would come up there just to talk to me. He said, you're fucked. You're going to the penitentiary. And he gave me some advice about the penitentiary, saying like, look, it's not like this. You are going to see things that you haven't seen before. The United States penitentiaries, and at the time in the federal system, mind you, there were very few penitentiaries. There was Marion and Terre Haute. Terre Haute at the time was where they did the death sentences, and they held a lot of people over for death sentence. Marion was very maximum security. At the time was the supermax, so not a lot of transfers, but you had Lewisburg, Atlanta, Leavenworth, and USP Lompoc. And so I knew I was going to Lewisburg, Atlanta, Leavenworth, or Lompoc. That's where I was going to go. And this was in late 1991.
Now, did they pass off your case for additional charges?
No.
They didn't refer it out at all?
They didn't. And to this day, I can't figure out why. Because Mondo spent several days in the hospital, required extensive medical care, and he got out 6 months later and then was killed in a shooting in Seattle. Ironically, he was also from Seattle, but the only thing I can think about is here they had these two big guys. They had these two very small guys. How do you present that in court? But they didn't even come with a, hey, we're going to charge you, plead guilty, and get 5 more years. Nothing.
It's so weird how they pick and choose. Like, I think the most unfair thing is the cell phone thing, because you have millions of people getting caught with cell phones literally in prison, but there's these random states. They must not have any of the other crime going on where they they choose to prosecute, and these individuals get another 2, 3, 4 years, which is so unfair.
It's the same way with knives or shanks. I've seen guys at the penitentiary or at the FCI get caught with one, and if it's a Monday, they're charging people. If it's a Tuesday, they're not. I don't know. How do they decide those things?
It's crazy.
Yeah.
The only thing they're consistent about is that hearing with DHO and then
That's it.
staying in the shoe. That's the only thing they're consistent about.
Yeah.
So they end up sending you to Lompoc.
Yeah. So they went through our hearing, right? Found me guilty. Took all my good time for that year, because at the time that's all they could do was take that period's worth of good time. They took that. And then they left us there to serve our time in that shoe. And actually, the cops, the COs, they put Devin and I in the same cell, and they gave us a big cell on the end that had a shower in it and everything. And when they took us to the property room, you can go in there and you can get your books and your legal paperwork. They let us get anything we want. So I took my Walkman, I took my art stuff, because I'm an artist too, and I took my art stuff, and I had this whole mural on one big wall, and I knew we were getting close to getting transferred, because the CO came down and said, hey, you're going to have to get that off there by next week, because I saw, by next week we're out of here.
Yeah.
So they gave us a can of paint. We painted over, but they even said to us, they said, I respect what you did. A lot of the COs would come by and say, I really respect what you did there.
Now, did it really fall on you personally for the shoes? Because you gave it to your friend. It should have technically fell on him, right?
Yeah, and that's why we both did it.
Okay.
Right? You roll with your dog, right?
Yeah, but you could have been a dick technically and just beat up your friend, and that would have been equal, right?
Get me my shoes. I could have been, yeah.
Okay.
But again, it goes back to your conscience, right?
He wasn't the real enemy.
I wasn't going to let that guy go by himself.
And he
wasn't going to do that.
He wasn't the real perpetrator.
He wasn't the perpetrator.
Yeah, someone stole it from him.
Yeah.
That's wild. So now they send you, is it by bus, or are you back on Con Air?
So no Con Air for this guy. So they load us up, and we're in Sheridan. And course, they don't tell you where you're going. So we go back to Portland. There's Con Air. I'm thinking, I'm going to El Reno, right?
You
Nope.
really wanted to go to Reno.
I really wanted to go to El Reno. I didn't get to go. So they let us sit there, and Con Air lands. It's the same thing again, right? And then they leave Devin and I both on the bus. And I'm thinking, how are they going to send us both to the same penitentiary? They can't do that. We assaulted somebody together, right? And so they load us on the bus, and of course now we start driving south on Interstate 5. I said, we're going to Lompoc, baby, because it's you're going south on Interstate 5. You definitely aren't going to Leavenworth because you would have went east on 90. And so, of course, we're black boxed. Spent that full day driving all the way down to Dublin, where at the time they was kind of like an MDC. They would kind of use it for that, where they would have federal inmates in there that were in transit, and they had a females prison. And this was very much like a cell in the unit in FCI Sheridan, right? You got doors, you got a cellmate, and I roll in there, and it's all people are getting transferred. This guy I'm in a cell with, man, he was real quiet. All he did was read. He didn't give a shit what I did as long as I slept on the top bunk, right? And so we were only there for about 2 weeks, and as uneventful. You're going to come out of your cell, and you're going to eat. You're going to hang out all day, just like the county jail, and you're going to go back in your cell. 4 o'clock stand-up count, come back out of your cell, have dinner, go back into your cell at 9 o'clock, get out of your cell at 6.
Time moves so slowly in those facilities.
I used to read. I could read a 300-page book in a day. I read so much.
Yeah, there's nothing else to do, and
What are
you
gonna
don't
do?
have your property with you.
You don't have your property, so you maybe get to play spades or hearts or dominoes or something, right? But it's county jail-like, right? You don't really have much. And, of course, your property with all my commissary and shit was on some bus in a box somewhere.
And you still have no idea where you're going yet.
Well, I'm pretty confident we're going to Lompoc.
Okay.
Because now we're in California, and that's not too far from where we're at. So one day about 2 o'clock in the morning, bang, 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 Myers, roll your shit up. So you roll up all your stuff, and you got to put your extra clothes and your blankets in a bin by the door, and they march you down, and of course right back in black box. Well, now we ride back in that bus, and Devin and I are on the bus together. I'm thinking they're still not sending both of us to the same penitentiary. And so they do. It's only a couple-hour ride, and we show up at USP Lompoc. And they pulled up to the medium security first, and some guys got off, and I said, there's no way they're letting us in there. And they pull around to the penitentiary, and Ian, that's the day I knew that it was serious shit. Because if you've seen a picture of what USP Lompoc looks like, it is gray, 3 rows of wire, gun towers, all the doors and windows are rusted, been painted over a bunch. It's near Santa Barbara, so it's just outside of Vandenberg Air Force Base a little bit. And it's in a gorgeous countryside, but that prison ain't like anything I've ever seen. And so they get us off the bus and walk us down into where the hole is, H unit. You go underneath, and that's where your intake and outtake is at. And man, we go down there, and you don't have anything. You get your paperwork, right, maybe, and some guys have it. Mine was in my property bag. And they take us downstairs, and again, it's fill out this form, everything about you, right? And they took a lot of guys. They're saying, you, and you come with us, and they take them upstairs to the hole. And they do that with people who maybe have extensive prison history, who have gang affiliations, because now they're trying to sort out what housing unit they're going to put you in. Pretty soon, there was only 3 of us left in that holding cell. And so they take us out and give us a bedroll. Of course, they give you that. They look like the scrubs, but they're tan, right? You don't get your good clothes yet. Good clothes, put that in parentheses. You don't get those yet. And so they give us our bedrolls, and we're walking down the main line. And envision, this looks like most prisons. It's got a main corridor that's probably 30 feet wide. And off of it are branches that are housing units. And each housing unit is 3 stories high. And it's very much looks like any significant prison story you've seen, Alcatraz style with the bars and the bean hole, and and it's loud, and there's people leaning over the rail looking, and we go rolling up in there, and they take us, and here's the CO, and the CO puts me in a cell, and it's this fucking kooky guy. He's a little bit weird, and I'm thinking, oh man, he's like I wonder if he's a serial killer, because he kind of gave off that vibe, you know. Well, come to find out, he's just a hippie that's overdosed a few too many times on LSD, and his mind didn't come back, so he kind of wanders in his thought a little bit. And he didn't care what I did, but he lived minimalist. He had hardly no property. At the time, there were still some federal inmates that had green clothing, and so he always wore this green clothing, and he stood out from everybody else. And so, yeah, that was that first interaction, go rolling in there. Man, it was terrifying.
Were the guards telling you what you could expect or anything at all, or anyone kind of giving you insight?
When we were in intake, the officer there handed us the little booklet that lists all the rules and expectations and shots, and he threw his copy in the garbage, and he said, I advise you to put that there. None of that matters where you're going.
That's
and I was like,
know
oh,
it's bad.
shit.
What was who was the first guy they put you in a cell with?
Yeah, it was that guy I was telling you about with the old hippie guy, right? They put me in a cell with him, and it was just before, I think it was just before 4 o'clock count, if I remember, and his mind was all over the place because he'd done LSD for years. And he was in there for bank robbery from Seattle.
Did you guys know each other at all? Or
no, we didn't, but he knew a lot of the same places, and so we kind of hit it off. I kind of liked the guy. I felt, okay, I'm not in the cell with, they didn't have any child molesters in cells there.
And he wasn't gang affiliated at all?
Not gang affiliated in any way at all.
But he was a white guy too?
But he was a white guy. Yeah, you don't cell up with people of a different race. So, you see it a lot in movies, and we've all experienced it who've been to jail. It's very segregated. Segregated by race, segregated by group, clique, gang, whatever that might be. So if they would have tried, I would have said, look, man, I'm not disrespecting you at all. That's your cell, but I'm not coming in there.
And you knew that going into
I knew that going into it. I am not going to cell up with somebody outside of my race.
Now, were you eventually approached within those first couple days by any gang?
Well, let's back up. Okay. So my first day there, we get out of the cells after 4 o'clock count. We go to chow, and then after chow, you could go outside. And so, but they also had an inside gym and like a band room and stuff. And I went upstairs. I was just exploring, and me and Devin, they put us both in the same housing unit, not only the same prison. So we, my cell, he said, hey, here's where all this stuff is. So we were just kind of walking around together, exploring where things are. And I watched one inmate hit another one with a 10-pound dumbbell and killed him.
And this is back when they had weights on the
They had weights.
penitentiaries.
So your time, they didn't have any weights on the prison yard.
We had them at Fort Dix. They had a locked weight pit where you could get access to go in, but that's like one of the last of the Mohegans. Yeah. I don't think they're in any pens or mediums.
So even at FCI Sheridan, in fact, I started lifting there, they had a whole section with, it wasn't great equipment, but it was a lot of equipment, barbells, dumbbells, curls and weights and benches that you could lift on. And they called it the weight pile. But they had a small set workout section upstairs that was more like for people who want to do aerobic stuff. We were upstairs next to the band room and watched a human being lose his life. That was the first time in my life I had ever saw a human being die. And it was a defining moment for me of what this place is going to be like for the next few years.
Now, was that so common that they didn't even bother locking it down, or did they lock the prison down?
Oh, no, they locked it down.
Okay.
So, and I don't think he died right away because it was not like we got locked down right away. So did I have anybody approach me? So absolutely. What actually happened was as soon as we got back to the cell and that night, because I don't think they locked us down right away, because he didn't die. I think he got up and walked with the medical staff down the stairs. But a guy came to the cell, knocked on my cell, said, let's go get your buddy. Went in and took us into a cell and handed each one of us a knife. Guy's name was Crow, and he fit the bill, man. He was tattooed all the way up his neck, had teardrops down here, and he was kind of, I don't know, I'm not going to say he was a shot caller, but he kind of led the white guys in the woods. They called everybody Woods. Peckerwoods was what they called us, and we called ourselves, right? And he said, I don't know how this is going to, because the two guys we assaulted are Crips. I don't know how this is going to play out, but we need to go have a conversation with somebody. Took us all the way to the third floor, cell E14. I'll never forget it. Knocked on the outside. Gentleman opens it up. One of the biggest black guys I ever seen. Says, yep, come on in. We went in and sat down. We didn't even say anything. He said, I know why you're here. I know what you did. If you don't do anything stupid, nothing's going to happen to you because of it.
And how'd they find out?
Oh, dude, that word spreads.
Even back then?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Because let's say a person was in Sheridan and they left the week before me to go down there. They'd say, oh, man, you wouldn't believe who was in the hole with me, this story. We weren't there 4 hours, and I was sitting in a shot caller's room, and he's telling me, you got no problem with Crips, man.
Is that because they knew that their people were in the wrong?
Yes, very much so.
That's the one thing you got to give shot callers credit. When their people are in the wrong, they own it. Yeah,
and this guy's name was Lala, who I became kind of friends with later on. And it's because I was a kid, in prison. Crow approached us, and we had knives, and we had so much time to get our own knife, and we had to give that one back. And again, everything's segregated, right? So you ever seen the movie Shot Caller?
Yeah, I saw it for the second time a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, okay, so you know how they say you're going to put in work?
Yeah.
And there's some other influencers that talk about putting in work. They're not shitting you. A white kid shows up, but the difference between me and somebody they didn't know, they knew that I would get violent. So they're not going to try to punk you off the yard if you're a white guy who's willing to get violent. They're going to save you for later when they need you. But you're going to have hustle, and you're going to do things. So sometimes that's moving a knife. Sometimes that's holding drugs. Sometimes that's putting in work and stabbing somebody. And so that's very much a reality. That scene when he first gets on the yard and he meets those shot callers and they tell him he's got to keister that package. Ian, that's one of the most truthful things I've ever seen in a movie.
Now, did you technically have to still put in work even though you already did on the previous yard?
Yeah, I did have to put in work, but the approach was different. So I had several hustles in prison, and one of those was I used to make the betting tickets for the Aryan Brotherhood.
Even though you were a Peckerwood?
Yeah, as a white guy, so for the Aryan Brotherhood, the brand, right?
Aren't they separate though, the Peckerwood, or are they the same?
They're all white.
Okay.
You're gonna take direction from the white guys. So I had one of them come to me, a guy that he was my last cellie in prison. His name's Socks. He came to me and he said, I was working after a few months, I was working in federal industries, and I'd had experience in high school doing AutoCAD. So I was designing these molds for the wire factory. And he said, hey, we need somebody to make those tickets, and you're the guy on the computer now. But they paid me $100 or 10 cartons a week to make them.
It's a pretty good deal.
So I got paid. From, hell yeah, because back then, see, most people couldn't have cigarettes, right? But we had cigarettes. Camel cigarettes in the federal system was money. A pack was $1.
And it was probably a less dangerous job than other jobs you could have been given.
Oh, yeah, very much so. And because there's not many people that they'll give access to a computer. There's maybe 3 or 4 inmates in the whole prison. Well, I was one of them with access to a computer, so I would do a drawing, and maybe in the bottom corner, you'd have to zoom, and then there's my information, and I would take the ticket. They'd give me the line, and it was handwritten. I'd take the ticket. I'd go do one ticket, and I would print it, and I would take it back out to the cable factory, and I would, hey, verify this. They'd verify it, go back in. I would print all the copies, and I had to paper slice them up into individual tickets, and I had to make bundles, and then I had to distribute them out to other people that were in the factory. Their job was to get them out to the housing units. So for about 2.5 or 3 years, I printed tickets for the
So
white guys.
Are Aryan Nation and Peckerwoods the same thing? Is it all, how is that structured?
Peckerwoods just white guys.
And then Aryan Nation is?
Aryan Nation is the outside guys, the Aryan Brotherhood. That's the prison gang that leads up all the... If you go to a federal penitentiary, you're going to answer to the brand, to the AB.
So you're underneath the brand?
Oh, every white guy is underneath the brand.
And do you have to get branded or verified, or how does that work?
Yeah, your paperwork, dude. So remember I talked about the paperwork? Well, I rolled up the very first day, and that was one of the things Crow wanted when he came and got us. Let's see your paperwork. And for us at that time, it's just your PSI. And if my PSI, the whole thing tells where I was raised, how I was raised, my family history. You've seen a PSI. It had everything. Handed my PSI. That night he came back, handed the paperwork back. You're good to go.
And do they get you tatted or actually physically?
Nope. Okay. So unless you join a prison gang, the Aryan Brotherhood, the Dirty White Boys, which was a big prison gang, if you're, there were a few Nazi lowriders. You don't, in fact, I've got a tattoo of a 3-leaf clover. I wouldn't have done that while I was in jail.
Okay. And the 3-leaf clover?
That's the brand. That's the Aryan Brotherhood. And the tattoos on the Dirty White Boys are their state they're from with prison bars. And so that's their tattoo style. So I never joined a gang. I didn't do that. But again, back to your conscience, what's going to keep me alive?
You have to, yeah.
You got to, it's like,
it's
your way of paying for protection.
Yeah.
Right? You're going to put in work. And if shit jumps off, guess what? You're going to work. And if you don't go to work, we'll come get you when the job's done.
Now, what about your friend? Was he joining the same group?
Yeah, he put in work too. We all put in work, but he didn't have a way to put in work like I did, right? He carried a lot. He carried a lot of stuff to be able to put in work.
Yeah. What was something that they asked you to do that you didn't want to do? Like that was an absolute no for you and you had to find a way out of it?
Nothing.
You did everything they asked?
I wasn't. If they would have asked me to stab somebody, I would have done it.
And you just got lucky and didn't have to get asked that?
Yeah, because shit never jumped off where it needed to be done to that level. And I want to credit a few things. Part of that too is, y'all got people you hang out with. And one of the people that I hung out with in prison at USP Lompoc was a guy named Otis Buck Garrett. And Buck Garrett was the chapter president for the Hells Angels Nomad chapter at a Sacramento, California area, very high up in the Hells Angels. And I was a tattoo artist. And we didn't talk about that other hustle I had with tattooing, right? So they're not going to risk their tattoo artist. They're not going to risk their person printing the gaming tickets. And Buck was kind of like a mentor to me, right? So they're not going to risk, Buck's kind of probably looking out for me a little bit in that way, right?
Now, we know in today's world how powerful shot callers are with technology, but in the 90s, how much power did they have? The
same. Barry Mills, who led the Aryan Brotherhood, was able to, and still probably does, communicate. And in fact, in the mid-90s, in 95 or 96, there's always been an issue between the Aryan Brotherhood and the DC Blacks, a prison gang. And it jumped off again when the order came to take out several DC Blacks by Aryan Brotherhood. In fact, those activities combined with some other illicit activities, they received a RICO case. And so the Aryan Brotherhood, all the leaders of that are now in ADX Florence, and they received a RICO case that carried over all the way into the early 2000s. In fact, a guy that I used to hang out with, when you talk about not putting in work, a guy that I was pretty close to, they told him, hey, you got to take care of something, and he told them no, so they stabbed him.
Wow. Now, they say that these shot callers, they could be put in the darkest hole and they can still run a facility.
It's the same with, there have been mafia that have ran from prisons. Carmine Persico. I was in USP Lompoc with Carmine Persico. And so he was part of the Gambino family in New York. And And when I left USP Lompoc in 96, he was still alive and running shit from there.
What do you think it is about these individuals that people follow them even when they're locked? Like, if you think about it from the outside perspective, okay, this guy's in the hole now. We don't need to take orders from him. But yet people are still following these individuals.
It's alliances. Very similar to the movie Shot Caller, the alliances that he built up over that time period allowed him to take out the shot caller in that final scene of the movie and have the keys to the yard if he wanted them. Now, we know that's not how it he was snitching and trying to get out of that situation and seeing that as a turning point. But for a lot of them, they just retain the power, and it's through those alliances that they do it.
Now, tell us about the tattoo hustle you had, because you were showing me pictures, and I was like, holy shit, back then. Yeah. And you said you were one of the first people to do color ink on that yard, too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I showed up at USP Lompoc in 1991, and I've always been an artist. And I one of my tattoos, my very first tattoo I got when I was in Sheridan, it's nothing more than a skull with a top hat. And the guy that did it said, "Ooh, I can see it in your face. You're going to want more." Well, I'm covered in tattoos, right? And so I can draw. And I can draw just about anything I can see, and I can make up stuff. And so I was drawing for another tattoo artist because people could tell me, what do you want? And then one day I said, hey, let me try that tattooing. So I've got a little skull with a candle on my ankle. I did it. I walked out of the cell the next morning, said, what do you think of this? And the guy said, holy shit, that's better than I did after a year. So with Hustle, I had my 100 packs a week. I asked the same guys that were paying me, hey, I need a tattoo machine. I said, no shit, all right. So I tattooed some on my legs, convinced some people to let me practice on them. And so that's a great hustle. In fact, there was a CO, Carlos Vega. He's on TikTok now because he spent time in prison. But he was letting me tattoo. So he'd come around and say, oh, let me see what you got going. You know what I mean? And I'd have somebody on the tier, if somebody cop came in from the outside. But, man, he'd come by and look, and I'd just practice. Well, it was all black and gray. Everyone's doing black and gray. But I see things in color. My mind is very vivid that way, like with the smells, right? It's very vivid. And so I wanted to do some in color. So I was going to the hobby shop a lot, and the same guys had another CO under their thumb. And so we placed an order for some water-based pigments, and I took them back to my cell when I got them, and I set them I turned the iron upside down and evaporated most of the water out so that it would thicken it up like a tattoo pigment. And then in the cable factory on that computer, I made labels that said that these are water-based inks for watercolor, this and that, right? And I put a few watercolor pictures in my cell, and the cops, they'd shake down my cell and they would find that tattoo machine and they wouldn't take those colored pigments because I'd leave a little bottle of black tucked in there and they'd take it, right? And I'd get another one. And so a good buddy of mine, he came to me and he said, I'll be your guinea pig on some of the color stuff. And I did a dragon on him that came out the most vibrant oranges and greens. And pretty soon I started tattooing on him. So I tattooed. The only tattoos that I was never asked to do were gang-affiliated tattoos. I wasn't allowed to do them because they had their own tattoo artist who's a part of the brand. But I tattooed on a Yakuza. I tattooed some frogs and lily pads on his belly. A couple of weeks later, I received these beautiful books that he had somebody in his family send me. He couldn't speak English, but I tattooed in color these frogs and lily pads on his stomach. And so I would tattoo in color. People would then want to be my cellie, and I'd say, okay, here's what it's going to cost you. We'll tattoo once a week, and this is what you're going to pay me. So we would be in our own cell. We could ask for the door to be locked in. Boom, we could just crank out work when Vega was there, right? Man, I would just bust out tattoos, and I could earn $300 or $400 a month and not even try.
Yeah, were you guys able to have the guards switch you out when you were ready for a new client in the cell? Yeah,
so if I would tattoo on somebody for 2 or 3 weeks or a month, I could say, hey, that cell opened up. They want me to be their cellie. Well, if I'm going to tattoo on Billy or Randy, and they say, hey, I need you to move out for a couple weeks so I can get my tattoo work done, they're all about it.
Yeah, because cells are pretty much, controlled by the head orderly, right? At least now it is.
No, they're controlled by the CO in the penitentiary.
Oh, so I know like now in the, like the camps and lows, you go to the head orderly, you pay him off.
That's
he
how it was
tells the
done at
counselor.
Sheridan.
Okay.
Yeah, but at the
it's just the CO and he can swap it right then and there.
Yeah, he can just go right in and because it was all paper. They didn't have computers in their office.
Yeah. Now, when you say tattoo gun, was it a real one from the street or a built one in the prison?
It was a built one. Okay. Yeah, man. And then pretty soon I got good at building my own. I worked in the cable factory. These guys would, hey, I'll do a small tattoo on you. I'll pay you some camel, some money for the parts, and I'll build it. And, man, when you're a good tattoo artist, people want the work. They want to get some ink. And because of that, man, they'll jump through hoops for you.
Were you allowed to tattoo non-white guys?
Nope, absolutely not. Remember I told you about Lala living next door? Mm-hmm. Well, eventually I got a single cell. The top tier of all the units at USP Lompoc, because of capacity constraints, were single-celled. And so he was in E14, I was in E13. And on the other side of him was another tattoo artist. I showed you a picture of Jason Walker. Mm-hmm. And we were both tattoo artists. And I wouldn't tattoo on him, but I taught his people how to tattoo.
Did he know that you weren't allowed to?
Absolutely.
And
he asked me to do it, and I said, I can't do that, man. He said, I respect that. Will you teach us how to do it? I said, you fucking right.
And you're allowed to teach.
I can teach. I can't hold the machine on your skin,
That's so
but
silly.
I can teach you how to do it. It is because I grew up, my mother, one of my favorite people on this earth, gave me all the culture and with peoples and foods and traveling that she could. Mm-hmm. And I didn't grow up that way. But again, it's segregated.
Do you think that'll ever change?
No, I don't think so, because the prison authorities don't want it to change. Imagine when I was at USP Lompoc if all 1,800 people were united.
They need the
They need the division. They need that to happen in there. And you know what? The shot callers need it to happen too.
But notice how it reflects solely on the charges that the people are there for, because at a camp, everyone's in unison, but there's not that same outcome. There's not an uprising if everyone's unison,
Right.
And that relates specifically to those charges.
To the willingness to commit acts of violence or to take it to the next level. I saw people when I was in Sheridan who didn't stand up for themselves.
You get bulldozed.
Oh, yeah, big time, right?
Did you ever make it back to a medium, or you were in the pen the whole time?
I was in the pen the whole time. So, that was, it was a crazy experience. When I told you that I was scared going into there, wasn't the most scared I've ever been in my life. But, Ian, I've watched 3 people die, physically watched them die, and 2 prison riots. And one of those prison riots was when the Crips and Bloods kicked us shit off in 1995. I was on the yard when it happened, and they started hitting each other with weights. And the smoke grenades come, and the less than lethal bullets come out. I was only 23, 24 years old by the time I'd seen that. And so, but my point system was never going to get low enough, because they do it on a point system, and they might still today. But my points after I assaulted that guy took me so far into the maximum security that I didn't have enough time to work my way out of it.
Yeah, because your sentence was relatively short for a penitentiary.
Yeah.
You should have never ended up there. Granted, you did that thing, but otherwise you never would have been there.
I was one of the 10 youngest people at USP Lompoc in 1991.
I give you credit, man. I wouldn't have survived that.
And you know what? And I look like a baby. But, man, I had a history when you come from the medium and you do that, right? So I spent the rest of my time, but I assaulted somebody else, and I spent the last 9 months in solitary confinement.
You went home from solitary?
Yeah, man. I assaulted somebody for a bad tattoo that they did on me, and I was, I'd been getting high a little bit because I learned to do drugs in prison. So...
Don't they have rules, though, with the white gangs about no drugs? Or?
Oh, fuck no.
Oh, I thought you can't.
No, they make their money on drugs, man.
Yeah, to selling to other races, but not to their...
No,
really?
They don't have that. No.
Oh, they allowed you guys to... Okay.
Yeah, and meth. So the very first time I ever did methamphetamines was at USP Lompoc, and I shot it, and it blew the top of my head off. Remember we talked about the adrenaline? And so, man, it took me on a whole nother pathway. But I was kind of high and tweaking, and I wasn't happy with something, and that turned into assaulting somebody, and then an investigation, and more time in the hole. And you can spend 9 months in the hole. They don't have to start asking. At the time, they didn't have to start asking regional until you've done 9 months in segregation.
And even then, they can get approved for more.
They get approved for more.
Yeah.
And so I got released my last cellie with socks. And my release day, I was the most scared through this whole criminal activity the day I got out. Because I knew I could survive in prison. In fact, I'll tell you a story. Remember I told you about Otis Buck Garrett, right? Mm-hmm. And he was kind of a mentor to me. One day we were walking around the track. We did that every day at lunch. Him and I would just walk. We'd eat lunch and we'd walk. We'd eat lunch and we'd walk. And he asked me one day, he just stopped in his tracks like all of a sudden, and he looked at me and he said, "What are you going to do when you get out?" I said, "I'm going to get a gun and a bag. What the fuck do you think I'm going to do? I'm going to fill full of money." He hit me on the back of the head hard. And I looked at him like, he said, "If I ever see you again, I'm going to kill you myself." This is a guy who had 4 life sentences because somebody in witness protection program died and their family members and friends died, and 300 years. So he had 4 life sentences and 300 years. Obviously, deadly human being. And he said, "I will do it myself." I was terrified. So the next day, we go back out to the track. He didn't say much to me that day. He was kind of quiet. He stops in the same spot, and he said, "What are you going to do when you get out?" I said, "I'm going to get an old lady a stack of bills I can't pay and a job. What do you think I'm going to do?" He said, "There you go." And from then on, that guy saved my life, Ian.
Wow.
Because in that moment, that was the turning point, which I said, "I'm not coming back here." And every day he would point at these, "See those two? They've been in and out of prison. I knew them when they were in their 20s. There they are shooting heroin behind the workbench at work. You see that person? Spent their whole life in jail. Their kids are grown up," and every day he would tell me those stories. He used to tell me if I wanted to find a wife, I'd find her in the produce section or I'd find her at a laundromat. But he saved my life.
And you see people casually coming in on their second 20 piece.
And you know what it caused me to do? I became super reflective while I was in prison, and I would watch people coming back, and I would ask them, "Why'd you come back? Like, you just got out, what led you to come back?" And so that was the turning point of my life. Now, I got out of prison on August 16th, 1996. I was in segregation. My brother drove down from Seattle to pick me up in California. And the cop handed me the street clothes, said, "I'm going to see you again in 3 months." And I said, "Man, you are never going to see me again." And they walked me outside, and Ian, it smelled different. As soon as I walked through that chain link fence, I say that you hear people say dogs can smell fear. Human beings can smell it too if you've lived it long enough. And when you step outside that prison, we've all had that moment where the weight was lifted off our shoulders. I felt it when I've left jobs, when I've left bad situations. But in that moment, I turned my face to the sun, I hugged my brother, and I took a deep breath. It smells different out here. And we drove straight back to Seattle. Had to go to the probation office, and that probation officer saved my life. She was a pain in my ass, but the PTSD that I suffer from today from seeing people get murdered, seeing myself hurt somebody, it wasn't until I've been out of prison for 26 years, 28 years. It wasn't until a year ago that I started sleeping decent at night. My wife will tell you I woke up in horror, screaming. And so that probation officer got me into counseling. It was ordered. And sure, they would have to tell her if I said anything really dumb, right? But she got me into counseling. She kept me on a straight and narrow path. She saved my life.
And you never went back.
I never went back. So my life's been a heck of a journey, right? And I got strung out after I got out of prison. I did good until I was off paper. And I started doing meth, and I spent 3 years strung out. I've been clean since October 1st, 2001.
Congratulations.
Yeah, man.
But you never got jammed up on another crime, even while strung out.
You know what? I got arrested twice, taken in to sit there for investigation and let back out 2 times.
Wow.
And both times it was something peripheral, I would say, that somebody else is doing and I was there, right? And they'd say, okay, nothing here, and let me go. And on September 30th, 2001, I was with my brother, and he said, can you do me a favor? Just stop getting high. It's not going to cost you a dime. It's the last day I ever got high.
Why do you think you listened to him in that moment?
I think I was ready to. You know, I've told this story if you've watched my social media and stuff. I was shooting a lot of dope. Ian and I weigh 180 pounds. Today I weighed 125 pounds. That's the lightest I'd weighed since I was in 8th or 9th grade. And I did a shot that came straight from the cook, and I thought I was going to die. In fact, I can still picture the needle pulling it out of my arm because I didn't even put all the drugs in, and I was already feeling it. And I thought I was going to die. And then I remember thinking in that moment, nah, I'm not going to die. In fact, I know I can go all the way to here without dying. My next shot almost killed me. So I was ready to stop, I think. And I think I was getting more mature at that point. You know, I was 30. And I'd spent all of my 20s in prison or high. I was just ready.
What did you end up getting into for work?
Yeah, so I tattooed for a while. When I first got out, I went to work. There was a tattoo shop in the University District in Seattle called Atomic Garden Tattoo, and it was owned by this really eclectic Asian gal, this Japanese gal, and downstairs she owned a record store that was like a second time around. You could buy used records and tapes and stuff, and upstairs she had a tattoo shop, and I worked there for a while, and I did a couple of odd type of jobs. I worked in manufacturing, and my brother said one time, hey, come to work with me doing cabinets and countertops. So I did. I went to work, and Ian, it only took me, I was probably 28 when I started that. It only took me about 2 years to become a supervisor, and I loved leadership. And I think my experience lent me to looking at new people, young people from a different lens, and I became a leader. And I started my own cabinet and countertop company, which I ended up losing when I was kind of high. But I stayed in leadership for a long time, and it was it carried me through, and I ended up moving from Washington to Wisconsin, and that was partly, I grew up in a bad childhood, and I needed to get away. I needed to find my own space and my own people, and ended up moving to Wisconsin and stayed in that industry until 2007. I was a general manager of a manufacturing facility. I was probably making $75,000 a year, right? A small company, really happy, but the market crashed and you couldn't find a job in construction in 2008. So I sold a boat, a truck, a Harley Davidson, and 2 ATVs, and I went to college. And I got a degree in operations and supply chain management. And I graduated with honors because, like when you were in high school, you buckled down because you wanted a certain career, right? And the same thing, I'm like, I got to turn this into something. And I was super motivated. After I got out of prison, I got clean. Prior to me going to prison, I was not a confident person. I wasn't the center of attention. I didn't have a lot of confidence. Prison gave me confidence. Man, if I can survive that bullshit, this is going to be easy. So I was motivated. I was motivated to work. And so went to college. I had an internship and a job lined up before I even graduated. I graduated in 2011 with that degree in business. And 9 years later, I was promoted to an executive position for a $1 billion organization.
And never once judged by your past?
They couldn't find it because Pacer, which holds all the electronic, didn't start until 1998. I was convicted in 1996. So unless they did a special nationwide FBI search, they would have never found it. After a certain point in time, they don't ask anymore. My most recent jobs. If they did ask, I lied. Because I didn't have the job to begin with, and they can't take nothing away from you. So I would lie. And I figured if they caught me, I'd say, well, you know what? I gained experience, and I got to show you my good side.
Wow.
Yeah. So, the prison thing, and I talked about turning points, and one of the things that I tell young people now is pay attention to those who want to help you. Gary Dash, Buck Garrett, my brother. And sometimes in those moments, you don't see it, right? You don't see that those people are helping you. And mine were at my darkest moments. Here I was at the point I could have easily gotten out of prison, gotten a gun, gotten a bank, and been back in prison. And that would have been a third strike for me.
Now, do you think that these individuals that hired you, if they heard this story, like if they sat and listened to this full 2-hour story, right, would they still hire you after, do you think?
No, I don't think they would have, and that's why I'm so easy to lie about it. So let's come full circle. I retired in February of this year from an executive position at a billion-dollar company to dedicate the rest of my life to helping other people not go back. If I can help one person, all of my abuse as a child, my time in prison, my drug addiction will be worth it. I just have to help one person. But I'm going to help thousands.
I think it's incredible about the whole corporate job thing, because that's me and you had similar paths in that.
Yeah.
And I want people to, understand that is possible.
It is totally possible.
It's not just a one-off type thing.
Yep. And I think, Ian, the thing that I think is the most important is that this is the time in history at which things are changing because of people like you. You're giving people like me a platform to say, I went from ex-con to executive. And so can you. And it's also telling people who live in society who maybe don't understand us to say, hold on a second. Look at Ian's past and look at his present. Look at Shaun and what he accomplished. We are on the forefront of being able to be the beginning of how society in America looks at crime and punishment, at restorative justice and rehabilitation. Because it will not happen through our politicians.
No.
It is, if it's going to happen, it's going to be because of people like you and I, and then other people who hear our story and are willing to give a person a chance.
That's why reentry should be the focus.
It should be the focus. And then what? Education. So if we focus on reentry and we get into the schools, and I've sat with some of the groups locally in the Wisconsin area, and they say education. How do we educate people? If we help them in primary and secondary education, we'll prevent crime. The United States has a recidivism rate of about 70%. Most of the 1.7 million people that are in prison today have been in prison before. So if we simply stopped recidivism, we would go from the top 10 nations of incarceration to somewhere like Europe, Western Europe, that's in the bottom 10. And so my objective today is to get this message out there, to celebrate the fact that some of us have gone to prison and are very successful, to give those people the idea that it is possible, and encouragement. And then so I also participate locally with some of the national chapters of nonprofits and some local nonprofits with us. And then I'm starting a public speaking career where I'm going to share my story and my successes and individual mentorship or group mentorship for people who don't want to go back to prison.
Well, if you ever need some assistance, I'm happy to volunteer my time for the cause.
You and I are going to have some conversations, and you've had some other folks on here that have really, really given me encouragement. You had the psychologist on here, and I think we need to focus a little bit on the PTSD that's caused from folks who go to prison. I have severe PTSD, and it's made it hard for me to hold a job. I've never had a job for more than 5 years. And there's several triggers for me that happen that make it different. And I end up leaving mostly of my own accord. Okay, I'm done with this. I'm out of here. But, we need to address those issues and listen to people like that psychologist. I forget his name. He came on here
I know who you're talking
and he
about,
talked
yeah.
about the eye movement and PTSD.
Yeah.
Love those stories.
Yeah, and a lot of there's a prison content community, and I don't think any other platform has those types of stories because they're not entertaining, and it's part of it. Like, we have victims, we have prosecutors,
That's
we
right.
have psychologists, clinical therapists, social workers. Are they the sexiest interviews? No, but it's all a piece to the puzzle,
But look at your success, and that shows you that people want to hear it.
Oh, I agree 100%. Like, I might not have the highest amount of views in the prison genre, but I'm getting the advertisers.
That's right.
It's more of a structured business, and that's what I want to listen to. I like listening to a psychologist talk about it.
Me too.
I can't sit here and your story is awesome, but I can't listen to 10 of yours in a row.
Right.
It makes it different,
Right.
I love having an addiction story here, or a prison story here, or a full circle. Like, I put your story in the category of it's a full entertainment story where you have a crazy crime, a crazy prison experience, and a crazy after prison, but not every story is like that. And that's totally okay.
And I think, there's, we've been sitting here talking for a couple hours, and I haven't even touched on the things I've seen in prison or the things that I did to be successful, right? Mm. And so, hey, I appreciate you. This means a lot to me as an individual. It means a lot to my wife who's sitting out there. I'm going to give credit to my wife. She's trying the social media thing, and she's gone viral on a couple videos, and she's super happy. But she's why I'm sharing my story. She's been telling me for 10 years, you have got to share your story. Dude, share your story. And so when I retired, I shared it, and you asked me if they would hire me. I have had my last executive position because I shared my story.
Wow. What do you think she thinks of this right now? We're about to find out, but do you think she learned anything new?
She's super proud of me. No, she didn't learn anything new. I have been very open with her. She's got 2 daughters, which are my kids. I love them, and I wanted to be open with her about my past, and I did that on our 3rd date. And she is the most supportive, and her family, they're my family. They're the most supportive people. Some of her aunts and uncles, they're like, I'm so glad Shawn's telling his story. Right?
That's so
overwhelming.
awesome.
I'm going to say 95% are positive, 5% are not so positive. But you know what?
You need those people, though.
You need those people, right?
Yeah, you need those. They can't all be positive.
That's right.
Well, Shawn, thank you so much, man. Amazing episode, and looking forward to doing some stuff with you.
Yeah.
I have this whole Rolodex of individuals with success stories, and maybe we can put our heads together and see what we can come up with.
Absolutely.
And
I love it, man.
Safe travels back to Wisconsin. Enjoy the city.
Thank you.